Hi, I'm Tanya Mark, and I am from the Empowered Women's Wellness Club. And it's a 10-week coaching program. It's self care strategies really focused around up leveling our nutrition and our exercise and our stress management strategies. And lots of my ladies come to me because they're complaining of the muffin top, right? The muffin top, like overwhelm, anxiety, lack of vitamin T. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today, Carla.
Yeah, same here, Tanya. So, my name is Carla Johnston Crace, and discoveryourcenter.com is where I help moms. And I specialize in working with adoptive moms. I'm a parent through adoption and birth. And how do we develop healthier habits and life giving rhythms so that our whole family can thrive? Because I know for me, following the birth of my first child and then later the adoption of my two youngest, just caring for myself became increasingly difficult. And when you and I, Tanya, were together recently, we just discovered that we had a number of things we would just love to talk about. And today, just getting more into the relationship that we have with food and how that can mirror just the way we live our life. So excited.
Yeah. So I love that. Like how our relationship with food mirrors how we live our lives. So what does that mean? Especially as women,
Yeah.
you know? And I think typically we do one of the things we can notice is like that we can talk about the word rhythm, right? And I think it's so important that we talk about our daily rituals, like what we do from when we wake up, like what time we wake up, when we're having breakfast, what kind of meals we're having, um, the size of them, the speed of the meals, right? And the whole day, until we go to bed, and how there's a rhythm to it. And a lot of us get really disconnected from that. And so it ends up being a really rushed meal, or lunch is an afterthought, and how that creates kind of more of that um, anxiety and the fatigue.
Yeah, and I used to live in that rhythm, and I'm so glad that I don't anymore. But it was a sense of waking up and already sort of feeling behind, and because I already woke up and I was feeling behind, everything else felt harder. Every rhythm of the day felt more challenging, and that definitely moved into meals. And I could feel how it was affecting my own life and my kids' life, especially. Just the tone of the meals, or whether we were moving kind of on the go or scrambling to pull out something, just the nutrition in it. Yeah, it's so related. The tone of our day in the morning, I think, really carries over into all the food choices we're making throughout the day.
Yeah. And so let's talk about a little bit about the rhythm and um, how we can create more of a healthy rhythm that'll translate into a better relationship with our food and our meals. And so, one of the things that we like to talk about is, let's start. I mean, I know I'm going to start right in the middle of the day, so that's kind of crazy. Not at the beginning, not at the end, but that's okay, right? Let's
That's
talk. Let's
totally
talk about
okay.
lunch, right? And so, lunch. Wow, a lot of times it's the middle of the day, and I can speak from when I was working in a job as a personal trainer, we didn't get time to eat lunch,
Hmm.
And so I just powered through it, and I didn't stop to nourish myself. And as a result, like the afternoons, I was exhausted and depleted, but I was supposed to be there to be like the cheerleader for all my clients. They're coming into fitness classes. I'm there to motivate them. And I was exhausted because I didn't nourish myself. And as we like to talk about, like this is something you and I share, Carla, and what we like to teach our women is how important lunch is.
Yeah, that noontime, that midday meal is so incredibly important. So, I'm a student of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing science that goes with yoga. And the way it's understood is that at that time, our digestive fire okay, really like a fire in the belly is strongest. And I like to think of it, it has the fire element of the hot sun of the day, and it mirrors the rhythm of the day, right? And so that's when we want to really be nourishing ourselves best. And I know that from working with a lot of my students, that's usually when they're looking at a real light meal and then they're eating heavier in the evening. Now, I come from a farming family, and I remember, the language we used growing up was breakfast, dinner, supper. Supper meaning
Ah,
supplement, right? And the supplement was the lighter meal, and it was intended just to carry you through the breakfast, the breaking of the fast the next day. But we've really shifted that, and so now I think a lot of women in particular, with a lot of diets and articles that are out there, sort of guiding us to have a lighter lunch. But it's so important to really sustain during the high fire time, high agni, high digestive time of the day. And when we do that properly, then we have more energy to move in the afternoon, and we're less likely to really be reaching for the caffeine or the sugar or whatever we need to kind of get that boost going through.
yeah.
So it's a big part of that rhythm, and I think there's a range in there too. Sometimes we have the tendency to feel like we need to eat at a certain time, and I know when I'm working with my students, and we're shifting, we work and one of the first habits we go through is shifting to having an earlier, lighter meal in the evening. And one of the ways to do that is look at how are we eating our lunch, our midday meal. And sometimes um, they're talking about being hungry and not having enough, and I'll say, well, when are you hungry? And I had one student say, well, 10:30 in the morning. And I said, when do you eat your lunch? And she said, about 11:45. And
Mm.
so she, the rhythms, the rhythms of the day, and how we also just sort of check in with our own rhythms of when the body's hungry, when the body feels satisfied. What, how do we begin to connect those together?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is great because I totally agree with, yes, that lunch typically ends up being an afterthought or something we just
Hmm.
need to, you power through it, right?
Yep.
You hear the word power lunch?
Yeah.
Like that's
Power
so
bars.
typical,
I spent a
right?
long,
Or,
I,
or
I spent
right.
many years eating power bars for lunch, and then I was depleted after that.
Right, because it wasn't nourishing. It was
Yeah.
a quick meal. You probably didn't even really register it in your head.
No.
And like I gave myself as an example, sometimes I was super hungry, couldn't stop. I had to wait till later to eat, and by the time I reached that point, my blood sugar had plummeted. And what do? Our bodies are smart and they're like, "Wow, we need to get you back up there." And so our brains go, okay, what's the quickest way? Sugar,
Yeah.
refined carbohydrates, right?
Hmm.
So that's why it's so important to have some rhythm. And so we need to work on, I had to work, I mean, I'm using myself as an example, my own self care and
Yeah.
saying, no, I need to stop and nourish myself. And and I was dealing with horrible sugar cravings. Shocking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. Like as Americans, we need to learn a little bit from the Europeans.
Hmm. Yeah.
They got
Slow
it.
down. Yeah, I'm curious, Tanya. So, we're talking about rhythms, and you needed to really shift your rhythm. Another piece with that is rituals, right? Like we
Mhm.
naturally have rituals around eating, whether we know it or not. And so, even if that ritual is maybe a not so healthy one of just reaching in the box and grabbing the bar, um,
Mhm.
I'm curious how that, were there any rituals that shifted for you as you shifted the rhythm?
Yeah, I mean, um, one of the really important rhythms, Carla, that I had to learn was that I actually had to plan.
Mm,
Like meal planning just sounds so boring and not fun, right? But when I didn't do it, I I could put myself in a position where I would get out of that rhythm because I didn't know what I was going to eat for dinner or lunch. And so, um, yeah, what ends up happening? I'll tell you what ends up happening. You order takeout.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, so one of my rituals is a Sunday ritual. And on Sunday, after I have breakfast, that's kind of my little trigger,
Mhm.
I sit down and I meal plan. And so that's an important ritual that I like to teach my ladies as well. And everybody's like, oh, really? And I was like, but we're practicing, right? We're not perfect. We're not perfecting, we're practicing.
Yeah, I love
And it,
that.
yeah.
Do you know meal planning was something I resisted. Oh, I resisted with almost every cell in my body, and um, and it was a really slow journey. And what's funny is I just recorded a little piece for my students on meal planning because it's a challenging point, a challenging habit to step into for them. So we're really trying to take it in tiny steps. I now have uh, sort of my own rituals on the weekend with my kids of, what do you want to eat this week? And we start with the plant-based things and we add around that and we look at the family schedule. Like if there's a kid's activity, like that's got to be a night where it's going to be easy. So I'm pulling out the crock pot or the rice cooker, or we're looking at, making a salad in the morning. We're looking at simplicity on those nights, and it makes a huge difference in the stress level of everybody over the week. But it did not start that way for me. I literally just had to say, okay, if we can plan 1 or 2 meals this week, we're going to be doing really great. And I let that just sort of drive me. It was almost like I just began to crave more because after one night of planning part of the meal, you realized, oh my gosh, this is it's so much easier. You're like, everybody's happier. We're helping each other, because sometimes the kids are coming into the kitchen, and mine are all under 11, and they would be like, can I help? But if you don't know what you're preparing, like you often don't know how to give them a job.
Yeah.
And now I do. And in fact, I can look at tomorrow's menu and I can say, tomorrow we're having carrots. Will you chop those now? There's ways to get the kids involved in that dinner rhythm now, which does feel like a rhythm. Before just to feel it felt so hectic and stressful and ungrounding, and now it's really fun. And sometimes we might put on a little music, but we have a plan, and
Yeah.
it's really big. It's really big to have a plan, but tiny steps. Like if you can just say,
Yeah.
if you're not a meal planner, just don't dive into everything because it won't work. Even more parts to my story. So once we started a couple nights, eventually I did start planning most of the meals for the week. And then I bought a board, like a little erase board for our kitchen, but I didn't put the board up for 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
then after it was up, it even took me a while to start. I literally had to say, okay, I'm just going to put a couple meals on the board this week. There was a resistance in me because it was something I never grew up with. We
Mm.
always had plenty of food and we lived on a farm, and but we didn't plan our meals, and that was really new for me, and it just took some time. But it's so life-giving, so life-giving.
Right. And like when we're talking about how our relationship food mirrors the way we live our lives,
Yeah,
right? And so when we start to have more of this ease and more rhythm, it's relaxing to our nervous system. And how
completely.
important that is to have um, that relaxation response around when we eat,
Hmm.
because that's when we are in optimal nutrient absorption, assimilation, um, fat burning. And when I use that word, it's about our bodies finding the correct balance,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and I think it's often something that when most people are concerned about their weight, they want to know what to eat. But like what you and I are talking about here right now is who we are as an eater
Hmm.
matters too. So that rhythm and how we approach our meals with more in a more of a relaxed state.
Yeah, I think it's more about asking different questions. Diets, and you've talked a lot about this as well. Like diets are based on motivation and they're about depriving. But like asking the question, what does my body need to nourish right now? What what would be really nourishing in this moment rather than thinking about the should or should nots? because even asking yourself the should and should nots creates a stress level around that meal that is a bit rushed. It rushes you through the meal, or it disconnects you from the meal. But if you can
Sure.
think about what is going to nourish, there's even the sense of slowing down in that process. Um, I have two adopted children, and so when you have children of trauma or adoption, there are a lot of food issues. Sometimes just around meals. Maybe it's abundance and scarcity. Maybe it's early malnutrition. There are a lot of things that could be underlying there. But we've really had to think about my husband Ben and I have had to think about our own language around food, our own rituals around meal times. Like how do we get ourselves, because we can invite our kids to do this, but if we're not doing it ourselves, right? They want to copy our behaviors more than they want to hear our words.
Sure.
So, for us and our family, like we ring a bell at the beginning of the meal and we take a deep breath and just sort of
Mm.
the centering process of looking at your food and knowing what's about to happen, sort of making that connection. Oh, now I'm going to nourish my body rather than just putting it in. And it's if you if your rhythm of the day is fast, you're naturally going to come into the meal fast. But we
Hmm.
can work from both angles or one angle, right? Like if we just take a breath before our meal, it's going to slow us down for this meal. And if we do that for our next meal, it's going to slow us down for that meal. And slowly that inches into the rest of our life. Or if we're taking on a breath practice someplace else and now we're just going to try bring it into our meal, it can come in from either angle. But I think
Yeah.
it's really important because it helps us connect with, first, am I hungry? And what do I want to nourish my body with? And just, really assessing what is all happening and how we can be really ready to receive the food or the meal.
Yeah. No, I love that, Carla, because I think um, mealtime has just been, for a lot of women, is something they got to get over with.
Hmm.
Like it's something on my to-do list versus something that can be really nourishing and be such a wonderful, like, sit down with your family. And I love how you ring a bell and how you mentioned how we can come into it really anxious or stressed, but we can change that with just the ring of a bell. Or I've some of my clients, some of my ladies like to light a candle.
Yeah.
I love the music because a lot of people say I love music, but I never really get a chance to listen to it. And I'm like, how awesome. You can sit down at the table, whether you're alone or with friends or family.
Hmm.
You turn on that music, you light the candle, and you enjoy instead of. I love asking this question: how what kind of eater are you? Like, are you distracted? Do you eat in the car? Do you watch TV? Are you checking your emails?
Standing at the
Almost,
counter.
or right, standing up. And so almost everybody today in 2015 says, oh, yeah, me, I'm guilty. And so it's just good to have a conversation about how important, these relaxing rituals and creating a nourishing environment around eating, and how healthy that is, not only to for our own health, but the example, like you said, setting for our daughters, our sons, our nieces, our nephews, our students, our
Yeah.
our maybe even
Everyone.
our parents.
Yeah, it's true. Like, because I wasn't raised in that environment, but and it's a little bit of a joke in my family. My mom's an amazing cook and loves to feed people, and often you just can't find her sitting at the table. She's up and down and up and down, but she has totally relaxed into that because we have slowly done that. And when she's with us, we
Ah,
invite her into that process too. And it was not easy in the beginning, but it is now, and I think she's able to just sit and really enjoy more the
uh-huh.
conversation and the presence at the table. And it is a practice. It is totally a practice. And, you know, don't get me wrong. Our little rituals now. Oh my goodness, our meals used to be just chaos. And and so it just starts with tiny little steps. And I think it's important. Like for us, the bell is the trigger. That the bell
Yeah.
is okay, now we're ready to eat. If that's lighting a candle, if that's just taking a napkin, and putting it on your lap, if it's taking a breath before you pick up your fork, or it's putting on the music, whatever that is, um, let it guide you and just, practice it every meal and in a way that, you can carry once you sort of get it into practice, then it's almost like the trigger doesn't have to be there. My kids, we can be someplace else, and I'll actually see them just sort of take a breath, before they eat, because it's just becoming a part of who they are, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's interesting how you talked about your mom because it just made me think, oh, my mom. Like I didn't really even think about it because, you know, growing up with my mom, she was always worried about like I just think about all the holidays, not even just like regular dinner because actually our dinner time she was great. We sat down for family meals, but my more recent memories are of holidays, Carla, and
Yeah.
how she was always trying to make the perfect meal, trying to please everybody, making sure the house was perfectly clean. And I felt like she was never really enjoying our holidays as much because she didn't sit down.
Right.
She was always worried about, filling the plates and keeping things hot. And so there was this stress response around it. Huh. And just being kind of aware of that. And I think that's really
Yeah.
wonderful that as you set the example with your family and your kids and how that shifted for your mom.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes what's challenging in that, for us, as women, and just sort of looking at, some of the rituals that have come with us or the traditions, that we don't want to let go of those because they are traditions and they bring such great memories. But yet, it's important just to sort of evaluate objectively, like, um, is it a healthy part of my meal rhythm? Or how can I create new traditions? How can I have new rituals that, I sometimes have students who feel that, that evening meal, it just has to be a spread, like it has to be a big meal, and it has to be
Uh-huh.
multiple things for the family. And, um, but how can we simplify? Does the ritual have, like, can we simplify in that and still have a beautiful meal?
Hmm.
Yeah, we can, and we can look at ways to do that, and what are some other pieces we can bring in, and then also just opening up to the conversational part and the connection part if you're, with someone. But even if you're eating a meal on your own, just the connection with you, the connection with the food, the connection with
Yeah.
nature, you're connecting with something bigger in all of that. I think it's important just to acknowledge sometimes there's a little bit of resistance, or almost maybe even grief in letting go of some pieces. And sometimes we don't even know what those pieces are, like that we're perpetuating things that, um, we're perpetuating some parts of our relationship with food and meals that we're not even aware of because they're so old. they're,
Yeah.
they're so rooted in past or family or.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You shared a piece with me another time, and I'm wondering if I can just invite you. You're the youngest child,
Yes.
and how did that carry with you into adulthood?
Yeah, you and I talked about this a little bit, how I'm the youngest of three kids. And so, and I'm so aware of this now, so aware of it. And we'd sit at the dinner table and I would eat my meal as fast as I could because I saw the leftovers that, like what was left on the table. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to eat this really quickly so I could get, what was left on the table. And I'm the youngest. I have an older brother and sister. And so for some reason, I created like this scarcity issue for,
Mm,
I don't know, just being the youngest. And to this day, I have to be aware of when I start to eat really quickly and I
yeah.
need to slow down and how that can really improve the health of my digestive system because there's this more relaxed response around my eating. But I had to really just even be aware of it, you know,
Mhm.
and how, but then, let's talk about the mirror, right? Like
Yeah.
how I, live my life and how I eat, start to mirror each other. And I can think of, I'm a very young person, like go, 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 get from A to B really quickly. Even I was even thinking the other day, I was in the supermarket parking lot, and for I no reason at all, I'm beelining from the supermarket to my car like in a rush, and I had to be like, huh, why am I walking
Hmm.
so quickly? Why am I going so quickly? And so there is that, the way I was living my life and the way I was eating, they were they were there. There was some mirroring going on
Mhm.
there. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to slow down. And I mean, if you really think about it, and if it took me a whole extra 2 minutes to walk to my car, but how, as a woman, how relaxing that is, how good that is for my hormonal health and my overall health to just calm my nervous system.
Mhm.
And just those correlations between how I was living my life and how I was eating my my dinner from childhood, where I was cruising through that dinner to try and get that last little bit, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, we're
So often
fascinating people, aren't we?
we are, aren't we? And so often we're I find like this was a piece of my story, and I find that a lot of my students share this too. Like, I'm making these healthy choices. I'm eating healthy, but I'm just not feeling healthy. My digestion is totally off. And and what we forget is that it's not just about the food choice. Like, there's a lot more at play here. We talked about the digestive fire and like eating your bigger meal at noon and your lighter in the evening, and that can help sync with some healthier rhythms. Um, but also like all that we're taking in, the emotions that we're taking in, or the speed that we're taking in with our food. So even if you have this really beautiful healthy meal laid out, but you're standing at the kitchen counter, eating it up fast, or you sit down at the table and you're really angry about something and you just start eating with that anger, like all that's coming in too. Um, so
Yeah.
it's really important just to sort of think about meal rhythms and how they, or our relationship with the food and how that's mirroring the rest of our day, or even just the moments that we're leading up to this moment where I'm putting food in my body and shifting sort of, I'm just going to eat to I'm going to nourish. And what does that mean? Kind of bringing the focus into that meal.
Yeah. That's huge because when I got out of nutrition school, some of the courses that I took were like food quality. And so after going through school, I could call myself a nutrition neurotic, meaning I thought everything was going to kill me, Carla.
Oh.
Because and you just learn about it. And then I started internalizing it. And so, what you just said about, hey, I'm eating all these really great quality foods, all these whole foods, wonderful foods, organic, you name it. But then I was so stressed
Hmm.
while I was eating, and I was eating more out of fear, that if I didn't eat X, Y, or Z, I was eating poor quality foods that were going to harm me. And so it's important to bring up that point about how you could be eating a food that isn't as that we perceive not as healthy, or something that we do perceive as healthy, but the way we digest it is really based on us being, our state of relaxation or stress.
Yes.
And so I love how you talked about that, and how what happens when we're under stress response. I mean, stress, whether it's real or perceived by the body, our body doesn't know if it's real or not. It could just be a
Right.
thought, like me thinking, oh, I need to eat perfectly. And that was creating a stress response. And so the stress response is a normal stress response, right? Like, but back in the day, it was designed so that we could run from the tiger, right? But
Right,
there's no
right.
tiger anymore. There's either like the low level chronic stress that we deal with as women, as wives, girlfriends, parents, caregivers to our parents, like all the things that go on in our world, that could be like a low level stress that's going on for us. And so that's really what the modern day description of
Hmm.
stress is, not the running for from the tiger. But what happens when we're under stress response is that our digestion is not going to be important. So the blood will get shunted away from our digestive system and into our arms and legs so that we can run from the tiger, which is not running from the tiger anymore. It's like our
Yeah.
our life rhythm. How's that rhythm? Are we
Right.
creating a nice rhythm, or are we more in thriving mode, or are we in survival mode? Are we in relaxation, or are we in chronic low level stress? And how important that is to our overall health. Um, and how it's not just about what we eat, it's how we're eating, who we are. That's powerful.
Yeah. It really is. And as you were talking about that, I just sort of had this memory, we've kind of moved out of it, but my 11-year-old Sylvia, she still we don't do a lot of gluten in our family or dairy, and it's just been hard to digest. And but for a while, it started with me, and then she was having issues at a very young age due to a virus she had had. And so I was pretty diligent about keeping these things out because when she was having certain foods, she would have these reactions. Um, and she became really good at self-monitoring herself. Like her teachers would say, "Wow, she really knows." She asks, like, "Is there wheat in that?" Or she'd ask a question. But it got to a point where I think she was um, thinking, you know, too much about how she needed to eat. And
Ah,
is this, so I really had to take a big step back. And fortunately, I mean, she didn't have celiac, does not have celiac. I mean, sometimes there are real, real strict food issues that,
mhm.
like a peanut allergy. We
Right.
really have to be protective around that. But with some other things, I just shifted how we were talking about it and asking her to really listen to her body, like how it made her feel. Um, so we'd go to a birthday party and all of her friends are having the wheat cake, and I might say no, or I might bring a separate treat for her. And there was a sense of being left out, and we got to a point where she was tasting these things and trying them herself. And I just continued to guide her and say, I want you to just feel, I want you to feel into it and just notice how you feel after. And in the first couple times she's like, cake, and start eating it. But it didn't take long for her to go, I don't feel very good after that. And it
Mm,
just really guided her choices, and it became really empowering because then it was no longer about what she could eat and what she couldn't eat, what she should eat and what she shouldn't eat. So there was no stress in the meal. And I noticed that when we shifted that, and I really tried to help teach her how to tune in when she was hungry, what foods might be calling for her right then, or to even think ahead, like, if you're going to have this, do you remember the last time you had it and how it made you feel? We just had like this big leap in health, in belly health, in digestive health for her. And so there is so much more to it than the food and our emotions and that stress level around eating. Um, and we can project that onto our children. The same way we come into this with some things that were passed on to us from our mothers or grandmothers or aunts or any other role models in our life, right?
absolutely. Yes.
How
Yeah.
we talk about food, how we relate to food, and even that energy around food. So maybe we're not naming all the stresses that we have, but they can almost see and sense it in our own bodies as we're interacting with food. They're going to pick up on that. And so, just with a little bit more grace, I think we can approach food and rituals around food and food rhythms and tune in a little bit more and trust some of this internal wisdom that we have.
No, I love how you said that, Carla, because I think that's something that my women are working on is a lot of them came to me and it would say, "Hey, as a mother, I have young daughters and I have some of my own issues around my body and food and the way I grew up with food." And one of the things that I really want to get out of this is to be able to set a better example for my daughters or sons or
Mhm.
whoever, your nieces or nephews. And I thought that was really powerful. And so I think it's important that we as women talk about the language that we use, not only for ourselves, but as you had said, they all pick up on it.
They do.
And so the words good and bad food or the words diet. And so the languaging can really shift,
Yeah, or the
perhaps.
I'm so full, I can't, like even those pieces are I'm not going to eat the next meal. Like those are some pieces I grew up with in my childhood. So I'm pretty protective about some of the food language in our own
Yeah.
house. But I think it's just nurturing and encouraging that listening. Like, are you hungry? What are you
Hmm.
hungry for? Are you satisfied? I have one daughter who can easily just overeat, and I think that there's still some early life, scarcity of abundance issues around food, and we've worked through a lot of that. But sometimes I just about halfway through, I'll just say, okay, let's take a little break. Tell me a story from school today. All right, now breathe. Let's listen to your belly. Like, are you hungry? And trusting sometimes too, depending on what kind of food issues you've had. Like for you, a different kind of scarcity. The youngest child, and for my daughter who maybe didn't always have food readily
Yeah.
available, there's some scarcity issues. And so when it's there, it is that sense of like, what if it's not there at the when I'm hungry, or what if it's not there at the next meal? Um, but just it's almost like when our we have to be the self dialogue for our kids. Like we have
Yeah.
to help give them the language and help give them the skills and help them really trust their own intuition by just guiding that process. So, and we have to do it in ourselves because a lot of
Yes.
times
And
it
that's what I
hasn't
was going to
started here,
say.
right?
That's something that we're working on as women because we
Yeah,
may not have learned that from our parents or our mothers
exactly.
or in the way we grew up. And so gosh, if we can kind of really change that generational kind of passing it on
What a
and really
gift.
pass on some really nice, healthy, relaxing rituals,
Yeah.
wow. And you're right, it starts with us. And so when I'm working with my ladies and we're talking around about food, it really is an exploration, Carla. And so language is really important because like you had spoken about how your daughter may not do well with gluten or dairy, and so that's a very common, it's those are buzzwords these
Mhm.
days, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are exploring that, and it's a lot of times when my women come into my group, they're curious about the dairy free or the gluten free, and so they might perhaps choose to, here's the word, explore, tune in, notice
Yes.
how the foods make them feel. And so the word could be restriction in diet, but if we choose to change our language around it and use it more like we've been talking about,
Right.
tuning in, noticing, like you said to your daughter, how's that make your belly full? Well, my gosh, as adults, we need to learn to do that. Some of us are just, most of us, I mean, I was there, so disconnected from how foods were making me feel. And like the aha moment where my list of symptoms, whether it was congestion or hives or allergies or maybe a little extra around the middle. Those were our, those symptoms are really ways that our body is trying to communicate
Mhm.
that something's, you know, maybe not quite right. And so we're tuning in and noticing. So, like you said, like changing the language, especially how important it is, the good fat foods and the bad foods versus, wow, I just don't really feel good. I mean, from my own personal experience, when I eat gluten or dairy.
Mhm.
I get really congested or I get super dark circles under my eyes. And it doesn't mean I never have those foods, Carla.
Exactly. Right.
There's nothing that I will not have. And I think that's powerful, not only as adults, but definitely, you know, the conversation that we're having. in front of our children or nieces and
Yeah.
nephews or anyone.
Yeah, it's interesting because it took a long time. It took years, kind of nurturing this language with my daughter because she's 11 now, and this all started when she was about 3.5 that she had
Mm.
that virus. So it's been a long journey. And just in this, a few months ago, I remember she came home and she was at a party, a sleepover, and she had eaten some, probably more wheat than she normally would, and just more combinations of foods. And she came home and she said, "Well, that didn't work very well." And I just thought,
Cute.
great, and I said,
Yeah.
"Well, all right, well, what do you think you might do differently?" And she said, "I think I'll make some other choices. I'd still try it." She's like, "It was really yummy, but it was too much." And she just realized that it's okay and you can forgive yourself and you can move
Mm.
on. And
Yeah.
she felt free to tell me too, because I think sometimes when our kids have, um, when there are dietary restrictions, okay, whether that is medical or just sort of our choice, then the kids feel that it's like the diet for the kids, right?
Right.
It's restriction,
Yeah.
and so if they eat that, it's almost like this. It's a stress response now for them. Like, oh, do I tell mom and dad? Do I not tell mom and dad? I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done that. Now I'm feeling bad. Do I tell them I don't feel bad? Like this whole little negative dialogue starts in their little bodies. So if we can just nurture it's okay. And as you know what, we will be experimenting a little bit with our bodies. And then you just let that inform your
Sure.
next choices. So okay. And she kind of knew, like the next day she said she just made healthier choices. Um, you know, I think that's a huge gift if we can just start passing those little pieces. And first we have to practice them
Yeah.
ourselves, being
Right.
forgiving
Right.
and knowing that, trying to take the shoulds and the should nots away and just when you eat something and it wasn't really aligned with who you are or the choices you want to make, well, all right, next meal. What are we going to choose differently?
Right. Yeah.
Tomorrow's a
Yeah.
new day and how can we start it differently? So, new rhythm, new day.
Awesome, Carla. This was a wonderful conversation,
It was
so I really
great.
enjoyed it.
Thank you, Tanya. So much. I look forward to more. There's just you're also a wealth of information and knowledge and experience that I'm grateful to have.
Look
So
forward to doing it again.
yeah. Take
Yeah.
care.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.